This video is brought to you by MagicJank.com, the spiciest cards for your sauciest decks. Buy and sell Magic the Gathering products and gear today on MagicJank.com. What is up, Janksters? It's your boy Graham, also known as HamHawks42 on the internet, and today we are continuing our series looking at the Brothers War and doing a complete set review, and today we are looking at red cards specifically. We are looking at cards that not only have the color red in their casting cost, but also artifacts that have red activations, things like Unearth, Prototype, and the like. So if it has a strong mono red color identity, that's what we're looking at. Basically, if you can cast it as, you know, with a mono red commander, that's what it works here. That's what we're looking at. And specifically, we're looking from the perspective of a constructed brewer. That is what I am, and that's how I'm going to be analyzing these cards. I'm not going to give a grade per se because it's very subjective. What I'm trying to do with this set review and all the other set reviews in the series is identify where the card fits, what kind of deck you might want it in, what formats those decks might be, and if a card is clearly designed for limited and doesn't really fit in any kind of constructed format, even in like weird janky brews, then I'm going to call that out because it's fair. I'm generally looking from the perspective of someone who plays standard quite a bit, as well as explorer and historic. I am an arena player first and a commander player second. So that's the perspective that I'm bringing to the table. If something looks like it might be legal or, well, not legal, playable in like an older format like Modern or Legacy, I might mention that, but I don't know those formats super well, and I'm not going to try to claim that I'm an authority on the subject there. So with that, let's jump right into it. We are looking at mono red. If you are interested in white, blue, or black, those videos are already up. And we will have green and then the multicolor and monocolor, including lands, at a later date as well. So keep an eye out on the channel for those. I will make sure the links are in the descriptions below, the cards, all that jazz. So you can jump from one to the other pretty easily. And I'll actually make sure to set up a playlist on the website as well, on YouTube, so that you can see them all in one place. In any event, here we go. Let's jump on right on in. That's the expression I'm looking for. Arms Race. This is an enchantment for 3 and a red. And you can pay 3 in a red. You may put an artifact card from your hand onto the battlefield. That artifact gains haste. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. This is sneak attack. We're getting sneak attack into standard at an uncommon. Now, that said, it can only sneak in artifacts. It cannot sneak in creatures. That is a huge deal. Be aware of that. However, there are some massive unearthed monsters. One that comes to mind in this set, there's actually the City Razor, or City Leveler, Cityscape Leveler, that's what it's called. It's an 8/8 for 8 that when it enters the battlefield or attacks, you exile a permanent. Arms Race plus that, you're doing the thing. It's bonkers. This card very much gives me vibes of Perforos the Bronze-Blooded, where it has this expensive activation, but if you can get, if you can pay the expensive activation, you can create some incredibly powerful moments with it. And I like that. I think it is limited enough that it being uncommon makes sense. I think it's very narrow in what you can do. Because if you're not dropping, like with Cityscape Leveler, for example, yeah, you get an 8-drop with an amazing ETB and an attack trigger. You get both of them on the exact same turn, and you then get it into your graveyard at the end of the turn so you can unearth it. That is by far the best case scenario with this thing. Like, it's not even close. That is, like, straight up the best you can do. So you need to be using... You need to get really stupid big things in with this. And the reason that I specifically call out really, really stupid big things is it costs 4 to cast Arms Race, just put it on the battlefield. If it survives, if your opponent doesn't blow it up, you then have to pay 4 again to activate it. Now, you can use Power Stone mana on the activation, so that's pretty great. Also, in older formats, cards like Zirda that can make that cheaper, all of a sudden you have some cool options. Actually, to be honest, I think Zirda becomes way better after this set drops because there are a ton of activated abilities that are meant to like be Power Stone mana sinks. And I think this is, I think cost reduction on activated abilities is going to be great. So I like this card. I think it's very, very strong in the right kind of deck. in the vast majority of competitive decks, this isn't even going to be a second thought. Perforce Bronze Blooded saw no meaningful play, and I think Arms Race will probably see no meaningful play as well, as far as the competitive scene is concerned, because it just costs way too much, and you have to have the payoff in your hand for it to be worthwhile. But this is a fun, janky build around that I'm going to try to make work. I like the concept of it a lot. Sneak Attack's a powerful card. Even a limited, expensive version of Sneak Attack, still probably good. Next up, Bitter Reunion. This is an enchantment for 1 and a red. When it enters the battlefield, you may discard a card. If you do, draw 2 cards. You can pay 1, sacrifice Bitter Reunion, creatures you control gain haste until end of turn. This is actually pretty sweet. We've seen cards like Cathartic Reunion that is similar to this. We've also seen cards like Thrill of Possibility, where they're usually like instants or sorceries where you discard a card, then you draw a card or 2 cards. And in this case, so, I mean, discard 1 card, draw 2 cards. That's on rate. That's pretty good. And it's a 2-drop. And you can, it has this added bonus of being able to just sack 1 and just give everything haste later. I mean, this looks like a great card, frankly. If you're in a situation where you want to be filling your graveyard and being able to, like, cycle through your deck, this does that for you in a great way. And then you have the added upside of being able to give your whole team haste later. So I think, like, mid-range style setups that care about the graveyard or care about drawing cards, this is really good. Also, if in a world where something like a Mardu Doom Foretold list exists, this could be really cool. In 5-color Zur type decks, you get a sorcery style effect in that ETB that you might want anyway, and then it also leaves an enchantment on the battlefield that you can work with. So that's pretty cool. I like this. I like this a lot. It also, actually, I need to call this out. Bitter Reunion is going to be existing in a time where Invoke Despair is a big deal in the standard meta. Actually, as of this recording, I just got done doing commentary for a standard tournament, and Invoke Despair won a number of the games that we got to watch. So the card's good. Part of the deal that makes Invoke Despair so good is that you usually don't have a lot of creatures, enchantments, and planeswalkers all lying around. So it usually hits good stuff. Bitter Reunion puts an enchantment on the board that you don't really care about. So if your opponent hits you with Invoke Despair, you sack this to satisfy the enchantment clause, and you really don't mind. So that's meaningful. And as a result, I wouldn't be surprised unless the meta shifts dramatically after Bro drops, and I don't think it will, for the record. I think we might see a little, like a minor shakeup. We'll see a couple lists shift, but I think the big players are going to stay the big players. And this actually answers that pretty comfortably. Actually, the mono red deck might actually want to put these in their sideboard to deal with Invoke decks. I don't know, it's just a thought. Next up, we got Brotherhood's End. This is a sorcery for 1 red. Choose 1. Brotherhood's End deals 3 damage to each creature and each planeswalker, or destroy all artifacts with mana value 3 or less. This card is great. It is a very strong board wipe. 3 damage to all creatures. At 3 mana, when you're casting this on turn 3 or 4, it probably is going to hit most things on the board, if not everything on the board, which is exactly where you want it to be. That said, we do live in a world where Rafine and Sheoldred are very, very popular, and this does nothing about either of those. So that's a little bit of a bummer. But at the end of the day, if your opponent's trying to go wide with tokens, if they have like a flipped Kiki Jiki, this blows it out pretty hard, which is great. You love to see that. And the other mode of being able to destroy all artifacts with mana value 3 or less is a big deal. That hits Bank Buster. That alone is probably worth the price of admission. Even if that second mode just said destroy all Reckoner Bank Busters in play, probably would be good enough. But this also hits treasure tokens. It also hits blood tokens. It also the list kind of goes on. 3 mana is a big hit. Like 3 mana and below, there are a ton of artifacts that are being generated or being played in the format right now that fall within that category. Also of note, cards like Phyrexian Fleshgorger or Steel Seraph that are prototype creatures that have a 3 mana mode. If they are cast out at 3 mana, they retain the 3 mana value as the value for that permanent. As a direct result, Brotherhood's End will kill them. So that's fantastic, unless they were cast at the full mode or they're flickered or whatever. So I think this card is just great. I think Commander players are going to want this. I think Standard players are going to want this. I think even in like Explorer or Historic, you might see this actually get some play depending on what other cards you have in the meta. Like, to be honest, actually, if Golgari Food remains a strong deck, this might be a good answer for it, because either mode, you're either killing their mayhem devils and any, geese or cauldron familiars they have lying around, or the destroy all artifact mode, you blow up their oven and every food token they have. Like, that's pretty good. Or maybe any uncalled anvils they have lying around. Like that second mode of destroying all artifacts, mana value 3 or less, that's big time. That hits a lot. Yeah, so this card's great. Simply great. Next up, Conscripted Infantry. This is a human soldier, 3/1 for 2 and a red. When it dies, create a 1/1 colorless soldier artifact creature token. If this was a 3/1 for 2, I would say it is okay if you care about humans or you care about soldiers. Given that it costs 3, I think this needed to be a 3/2 for me to even consider it. The one synergy I see with this is casualty. Being able to sacrifice this to a casualty creature, or a casualty spell, like sacrificing this to an Obnixilis is okay. Or sacrificing this to anything with a casualty 3, you get a little 1/1 out of the deal. So it's not bad in that regard, but 3 is way too much for the upfront investment. In a world where cards like Tenacious Underdog or Bloodtithe Harvester exist that are straight up 3/2s with upside for 2, I don't want to play this. I just don't. This is limited only. And to be honest, even in limited, I don't think people would be picking this particularly highly. All right, next up, we have Draconic Destiny. This is an aura for 1 red, mythic rare, enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and has flying, haste, and you can pay 1. This creature gets +1/+0 until end of turn. It's a dragon, in addition to its other types. When enchanted creature dies, return Draconic Destiny to its owner's hand. I think it's a fun card. I don't know that it's great, but it's fun. This definitely seems to be the kind of card that you would want in like a commander deck that's doing like Voltron action. If I have a commander that I want to like load up and get in for commander damage, this is fantastic. Being able to give it flying and haste consistently is great. Plus that fire breathing ability is no joke. The fact that fire breathing, I would say fire breathing, by the way, it's a reference to an old card that was an aura that gave a creature pay 1 red, give +1/+0. So that effect is colloquially known as fire breathing. The fact that that's generic mana instead of red mana is a big deal. I know you can spend power stones on that, and I'm sure that's the reason they made that change, but that also means that it's much better in multicolored decks. 3 or 4 color decks, you can dump black mana into this and not care. And still, it works just as well. So I think that's really cool. The fact that it creates a dragon, it makes the creature a dragon, I feel like that's more flavor than function, but you never know. There could be dragon synergies. Like if you're running a dedicated dragon deck, but you have like a couple of utility creatures that aren't dragons, all of a sudden being able to lift them off and then kind of join the squad and maybe get buffs based on other draconic, tribal modifiers you have. All right, cool. Like I like that. It's fun. Yeah, the card seems decent. It suffers from a lot of aura problems. The fact that it goes back to your hand when a creature dies is nice because you do have the opportunity to recur it. So that's better than if it just went to the graveyard and was gone forever. However, if you cast this from your hand targeting a creature and then your opponent kills that creature, it then does go to your graveyard and you don't get it back. So if your opponent times the removal correctly, that sucks. Also, if the creature gets bounced or exiled, this thing goes to the graveyard. That's a bit of a bummer too. So I think the card is generally fairly weak, but fun. So this looks like commander to me, and like in limited, actually, it could probably slap too, but I can't imagine this working in standard. Although the more I think about it, I do realize that Ivy, Gleeful Spell Thief, and Vesuvan Duplimancy exist, as does Light Paws. So we have aura synergies, and mana bases are getting a lot better because all the Painland cycle has now been completed in standard. So there might be an aura deck that could use this. Actually, in Light Paws, it could be especially fun because as like a one-of in Light Paws, if you have 4 mana auras that you can cast, you could cast one of those 4 mana auras, like I believe Take Flight in blue was one of them, and it could fetch up the 1 Draconic Destiny, and all of a sudden Light Paws becomes pretty beefy, and they have to they have to worry about that. So that's kind of fun. I don't know. It's interesting. Yeah, auras in general I don't think are that great, but this is a strong one. So if you do want auras, you could do worse than this. Next up, we have Dwarf Dwarven Forge Chanter. This is a 1/3 for 1 red dwarf wizard with ward, pay 2 life, and prowess. Actually, 1/3 for 2 is not a bad stat line. Like, it's not amazing, but it's not bad. It can block effectively, which is great. The fact that it does have ward, 2 life is not a lot, but if your opponent tries to get rid of it, you can just shock. You shock their face. That's nice. Like, it's decent. You like that. And the fact that it has prowess is also pretty cool. If you're going up against a red opponent and they try to like lightning strike this, you could cast anything in response to that, and it becomes too big for that damage to be relevant. Like, that's really cool. And you can wait until after they pay the ward cost to do that, which is pretty cool too. So this card, if you are clever with how you play the stack, could actually be really good. That said, there are better prowess payoffs in this set. A lot better prowess payoffs, and we're going to be talking about them later. In fact, possibly the best prowess payoff ever printed, which I will not say 3 times fast, is in this set. So I can't imagine wanting Dwarven Forge Chanter unless you are drafting a prowess deck. That's probably where you want to be. But even in Dominaria United, we had cards like Electrostatic Infantry, where it was a 2/2 for 2 with trample, if I'm not mistaken. And every time you cast a spell, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. It's like super prowess, like perma prowess. Like, that card's much stronger than Dwarven Forge Chanter. Both dwarves, interestingly enough. So maybe Dwarf Tribal is going to be viable. And this guy, I mean, he's got a decent booty on him, so that helps. I mean, by that I mean toughness. So I don't know, not a bad little card. I'm not enamored with it though. Next up, Excavation Explosion. This is a sorcery for 2 and a red. It deals 3 damage to any target. Create a tapped Power Stone token. In a world where Lightning Strike exists, I do not want to play this card. The fact that it can go 3 to the dome is pretty good. I mean, we like that. That goes a long way. And Power Stones, I think, are going to be decent, but this is a sorcery. That's the massive knock against it. If this was an instant, I would make a case that there are times when you might want to use this. But at sorcery, like, 3 damage for 3 at sorcery speed is really, really bad. And the Power Stone is not enough to counteract just how bad that is. Sorcery speed burn is not where you want to be. It's just not. Unless you're talking about a situation where you can like deal like upwards of 10 damage, like, it's not worth doing it at sorcery speed. Like, combat shenanigans and end of turn face blasts to mess with combat math, that's really where you want to be, and this doesn't give you that. Sorcery, the fact that your opponent like can respond to it not only with instance of their own, but also just by playing around it. Like, if you're gonna use it, you need to blast it on your turn, tap 3 mana that you can no longer use for any instant speed anythings. Yeah, I don't like this. I don't think it's strong enough, which is a shame because it's a cool design, cool flavor, but don't love it. Next up, the Fall of Krug. This is a sorcery for 4 red at uncommon. Choose target opponent, destroy target land that player controls. The Fall of Krug deals 3 damage to that player and 1 damage to each creature they control. This is fun. I don't think this is good. Land destruction is a bugaboo that a lot of players absolutely hate. Like, to the point where if you are in a friendly casual game and you cast a Stone Rain, the other person may feel justified in walking away from the game and not coming back if you invite them again. Like, I personally think that's a bit of an overreaction, but that's how much people hate land destruction. Hate it. No matter what. You can, like, insult my mother before you can touch my lands. And in this case, and Wizards has kind of adopted that in their design philosophy. They are aware of that. And as a result, I don't believe we will ever see a standard card that can destroy a land for less than 4 mana. And yeah, and even if it can destroy a land, like, it's gonna, like, a lot of times they'll add like some kind of upside even at 4 mana, but it's usually really bad. Like, they're very bad effects generally. And this is 6 for 6 mana. Choose target opponent, destroy target land that player controls. Fall of Krug deals 3 damage to that player and 1 damage to each creature they control. There's one situation where I want to run this, and only one. And now that I think about it, I'm definitely gonna do it, and that is in Arcane Bombardment. If I can get the Fall of Krug under an Arcane Bombardment, I am doing the thing, baby. Being able to sweep the board, potentially, 1 damage to everything, could sweep up some stuff. Maybe. Or worst case scenario could make combat a real nightmare for the opponent, because 1 damage, they need to account for 1 damage. And also just lightning bolt your 3 to the dome. It gives me 3 damage to my opponent's dome. I like that. But then also destroys the land. We have seen if you can recur land destruction effects under Arcane Bombardment, you can win games. Being able to cast it multiple times, being able to, if you could free cast this, early, maybe with a hideaway or something like that, or you can get it under an Arcane Bombardment quickly, you have an opportunity to restrict your opponent's resources in a very big way. If you are fairly casting this on 6, you're probably going to lose that game. Like, it does not give you enough. Yeah, unless your opponent has like massively missed land drops, and then it could like really punish them for getting mana screwed. But for 6 mana, I don't think this does enough. Unless you can recur it. If you can somehow cast this multiple times by doing things like Arcane Bombardment, then we're talking. That actually could be really savage. So, I don't know. In general, it is very expensive. You need to have a way to abuse it. Don't just cast this in like a generic red deck. Next up, we have Falaji Chain Dancer. This is a 2/4 for 3 and a red human soldier. You can pay 2. It gains double strike until end of turn. Double strike is incredibly powerful. The main reason for double strike being so good is that you can buff the creature with double strike, and it makes every power buff twice as effective, basically. And in this case, it starts as a 2/4. So it's a 2/4. If you pay 2 mana into it, it basically, like, it's a little different, but it effectively attacks like a 4/4. You have 4 power worth of damage. It happens over 2 combat phases, or over the 2 damage phases, but all the same, you basically get a 4/4 out of the mix. Now, you've invested 6 mana in that. Is that enough? No. It's just, that's not worth it. And we have better double strike payoffs than this. But at the end of the day, if you can buff this creature consistently, double strike can be very powerful, very potent. So I don't hate it, but I don't love it. This reads like a draft card to me. This reads like an okay draft common. Next up, we have Feldon, Ronom Excavator. This is a 2/2 haste legendary creature, human artificer at rare for 1 and a red. Feldon, Ronom Excavator can't block. Whenever Feldon is dealt damage, exile that many cards from the top of your library, choose one of them until the end of your next turn. You might play that card. This card's great. Full stop. This card absolutely rules. The reason that it's so good, it is a 2/2 for haste it's a 2/2 for 2 with haste. In red aggressive decks, that is exactly what you want. Exactly. There are a lot of mono red decks right now that are running Bloodthirsty Adversary, which, to be honest, Bloodthirsty Adversary is pretty darn good. So, like, they may still run some number of them, but I can see Feldon actually taking that spot, because right now with Bloodthirsty Adversary, the main goal is play it out on 2 and just be swinging with it. If you get it late in the game, you can cast it for 5 and be swinging with a 3/3 that also cast a lightning strike or something out of your graveyard, which is awesome. Don't get me wrong, card's great, but I compare it to Feldon Ronom Excavator because Feldon is always a 2/2. It can't block, but in the red aggressive deck, you don't want to be blocking anyway. If you're blocking, something's gone wrong. So your goal is to just go face as fast as possible, and this does that. And then on top of that, whenever it's dealt damage, you are drawing cards. So if your opponent has to chump block Feldon and they aren't able to kill it, they just gave you a free card. If they block Feldon and they are able to kill it, they just gave you access to multiple cards and selection over which one you get to cast on your next turn or even in your post-combat main phase. So if your opponent answers Feldon, they give you free stuff. Also, in decks that are running cards like Star of Extinction or Blasphemous Act, Feldon gives you a ton of selection, and you can dig for whatever the heck you want. I like that a lot. Actually, I can imagine Feldon being a really cool mono red commander running effects like that. And then you can also have Brash Taunter and what is it? The Loner, Ill-Tempered Loner. That's what I'm thinking of. You know, you can put those style of effects in the deck too, and just have a ton of damage-based sweepers, and have Feldon coming out of the command zone, and all of a sudden you're just blasting the board, drawing your cards, blasting the board again, drawing more cards, and every time you blast the board, you're just picking off your opponents with your Stuffy Dolls and Brash Taunters and Wrathful Red Dragons and the like. And that could be stupid fun. Just like some people want to watch the world burn, and sometimes you got to be that person. And Feldon could give you that, in addition to just being a good low to the ground red creature in a red, like a standard red aggro deck. Yeah, I think Feldon rules. This card's great. Next up, Giant Cinder Maw, 4/3 trampling dinosaur beast for 2 and a red. Players can't gain life. If you are on Arena and you are playing in the lower ranks, if you are just starting out and you are climbing your way out of bronze, trying to get up to platinum or so, this card is going to be great. Alongside there's a black card that just came out in Dominaria that also says players can't gain life. The reason that I call out that spot on the ladder specifically is because the mono white or Selesnya life gain decks are incredibly popular in a number of different formats, including Explorer, Historic, and Standard, and Alchemy for that matter, at those rarities because it is very cheap to craft. So if you are finding yourself going up against those life gain decks a lot, because they're inexpensive to craft, their synergies are very enticing, they're very easy to kind of wrap your brain around, and when it goes off, big numbers go burr, it feels really good. Let's be honest. It's fun. It's fun to play the life gain deck. It is. So it's very popular. That said, it's very one note. If you can check it with destroy spot removal or cards like Cinder Maw that can prevent life gain, that deck crumbles. And as a result, you don't see it at the higher points on the ladder very often. But if you are playing at gold or lower, you probably will. And Giant Cinder Maw, it does the job in preventing that. And also in general, if you're playing mono red aggro, shutting your opponent's life gain off is very important because your goal is to go after your opponent's life total first and foremost. And so you need to eat away at that life total as fast as humanly possible. And any incidental life gain that they happen to have, things like Wandering Emperor that just gain them 2 life just because, or cards like Herd Migration that when you channel it, gain you life just because. Those little life points really add up if you're in red. This says no they don't, and it just completely shuts them down. That's really cool. That line of text is very, very powerful. And on top of that, it's a 4/3 trampler for 3. Now, mono red doesn't really want to be playing 3-drops very often. Well, if they want to be playing 3-drops, they want to have an impact on the board right away. They either want to be hasty or they want to be just really big, so your opponent has to deal with them. Giant Cinder Maw isn't necessarily better than, say, Reckless Stormseeker. Like, that's a 3-drop, or Annex, hardened to the Forge, in older formats. So I don't know that Cinder Maw replaces those cards necessarily, except maybe out of the sideboard. Coming out of the sideboard against life gain heavy decks, this actually could be really strong. So I like Cinder Maw, actually. I think this card is better than, it's easy to look at it and be like, yeah, it's kind of like a big dumb 3-drop. And uncommon. It's easy to dismiss this as a draft card, but I actually think it could be decent in standard. I think in older formats, there are probably better ways to do this. There are better ways to shut off life gain, but this one is like Rampaging Ferocidon comes to mind. But Cinder Maw is kind of a new school Rampaging Ferocidon. It's even a dinosaur. So like if you're rocking like a commander or brawl dinosaur deck, slot this in the mix. It fits. It fits really well, actually. Yeah, I think this card's just solid. It's just good. Next up, Goblin Blast Runner. This is a 1/2 Goblin for 1. It gets +2/+0 and has Menace as long as you sacrificed a permanent this turn. There are blood tokens. There are treasure tokens. There are plenty of spells that want you sacrificing creatures. Things like Diabolic Edict and whatnot. And Blast Runner, I mean, if you're in that kind of deck, if you're generating treasures consistently, if you are sacrificing blood tokens consistently, or sacking creatures to things like Diabolic Intent and whatnot consistently, this is a 3/2 Menace for 1. That's awesome. If you have a treasure token down, this becomes a 3/2 Menace at will. And that's really good. So I think in sacrifice decks, this is absolutely an option. And on top of that, it only costs 1. So if you absolutely have to sacrifice this to take advantage of some other sack effect, it doesn't really feel that bad. You could do a lot worse. So yeah, I think this card is actually just a really solid little role player. And in limited, this thing's gonna rip. So it'll be very interesting to see if Rakdos Sacrifice becomes a thing, or even like a Mardu Sacrifice deck in Standard with running things like Ellis Ilkor and whatnot. I could see that being a deck, you know, with Only Called Anvil and things of that nature. I wouldn't be surprised if that comes back. The banning of Meathook really like chopped that deck off at the knees, to be fair. So I don't know if this is giving it enough tools, like if Bro gives that enough tools to really shine again. But if so, Goblin Blast Runner's in the discussion. And because it's a 1-drop, yeah, you don't mind just sacking it. On top of that, too, if you sacrifice another permanent first, it could be a 3-power thing that could casualty Ob Nixilis out. It's pretty solid. Just solid. Next up, we have a Horned Stone Seeker. This is a 2/2 lizard with menace for 1 and a red. When Horned Stone Seeker enters the battlefield, create a tapped Power Stone token. When it leaves the battlefield, sacrifice a Power Stone. If you're in a deck that really cares about Power Stones, I don't know that I want this. That the leaves the battlefield, sack a Power Stone is a huge drawback in that, well, maybe not huge. It is a drawback in that regard. However, the fact that you get a 2/2 menace for 2, that just creates a Power Stone incidentally when it first drops. We were just talking about those sack decks. One of the cards right now that sees a ton of play in various sacrifice decks across various formats is Valderen Epicure. The main reason that card sees so much play is because it gives you 2 permanents for the price of 1 red that you can sacrifice. Gives you a 1/1 body that frankly you just don't care about after it's been on the battlefield. And it also gives you a blood token that you can feed to your Only Called Anvil on turn 2 or whatever the, you know, however you sequence it. Stoneseeker gives you something similar. You're getting a bigger body, but it is costing you 2 rather than just 1. But it gives you that Power Stone, which you could then, you know, you could leverage that to get some additional mana. But more importantly, it's an artifact you could sacrifice to satisfy various effects. So I would look at Stoneseeker in a similar vein, in a similar style of deck as Valderen Epicure. The other noteworthy part here is if you're in an aggro deck that runs a lot of artifacts. If you're running like a Patchwork Automaton style aggro deck, this might actually be pretty good too, because it having menace means that it can attack pretty consistently and put your opponent in pretty uncomfortable positions with their blocks, assuming it's not attacking alone. And on top of that, you've got things like Patchwork Automaton that you can then spend the Power Stone mana to cast. So there's synergies here. I think this card is actually fairly powerful. So it's pretty good. The only major downside is like I really want to be blinking it. I really want to be blinking it to just generate a ton of Power Stones, but because of the leaves the battlefield effect, that isn't going to accomplish anything unless I've sacrificed the Power Stone to some other effect and I don't have another one. If I don't have any Power Stones down when this leaves the battlefield, even like if I flick it or bounce it, then cool, then another Power Stone shows up. Like that last ability triggers, but there's nothing to sacrifice. I don't know. Yeah, good little card though, just solid. It's a good 2-drop that gives you a lot to work with. Next up, we have Mechanized Warfare. This is an enchantment for 1 red. If a red or artifact source you control would deal damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals that much damage plus 1 instead. In burn decks, this is amazing. In red aggro decks, this is amazing. In situations where you can copy your enchantments, this becomes amazing. Thermo Alchemist is legal in Standard right now. I want to point that out because if you have Thermo Alchemist down on 2, you throw Mechanized Warfare on 3, you now have a creature on the battlefield that says tap, shock target opponent, and then untap whenever you cast a spell. That is insane. This card is great. If you are in mono red, run this card. If you are not in mono red, this probably isn't worth your consideration and worth your time. Because what you really want alongside this is a lot of individual sources that are dealing a relatively small amount of damage to your opponent. If you have a ton of things that only deal 1 damage, well, all of a sudden, all of them deal 2 damage. If you have one thing that deals 10 damage, like an Explosive Singularity or something of that nature, all of a sudden it goes from 10 damage to 11 damage. That doesn't feel too good. Meanwhile, if you have 10 things dealing 1 damage, it goes from 10 damage to 20 damage. That's fantastic. So this card is really cool. If you're going wide in red, do this. Like there are a lot of mono red aggro decks and a lot of burn decks that are going to be very happy to have this. Yeah, this actually reminds me very much of Tavalar. No, not Tavalar. Sorry, Tavalar's the werewolf. Torbrand, Thane of Redfells. This reminds me very much of Torbrand. He was a 4-drop that added 2 to every red source damage that was dealt. And that just straight up won games. Like, it was in Throne of Eldraine Standard, mono red was very powerful, and that was a huge part of it. Embercleave was also a thing, but let's not worry about that. This also actually combines really nicely with Double Strike, because if you have a 2/2 Double Striker, for example, it deals 3 first strike damage and then 3 regular damage. So all of a sudden, instead of dealing, the 4 damage it would have dealt, otherwise it deals 6. So that's really good. Yeah, card's great. If you're mono red rushing counting to 20, card helps you get there faster. Mishra, Excavation Prodigy. This is a legendary creature, human artificer at uncommon for 2 and a red. It is a 2/1 with haste. Pay 1 tap, discard a card, draw a card. Whenever you discard 1 or more artifact cards, add red. This ability triggers only once each turn. So the fact that it is a looter, so Mishra is a looter that can potentially gain you mana. So in order to take advantage of this ability first, like on the first turn, you have to have 4 mana lying around. That said, if you have 4 mana lying around, 3 to cast him, 1 to activate, discard a card. That 1 can be Power Stone mana. Then all of a sudden you discard an artifact card, maybe one that you want in your graveyard for another purpose. You draw a card and then add 2 mana to your mana pool that you can then use to cast other spells. I think that's actually not bad. Like, this thing's pretty decent, and on top of that, you can activate the ability at instant speed, or just attack with it. I generally don't want to be attacking with Mishra. Like, this is not priced to move as far as the aggro decks are concerned. So we've been talking a lot about mono red aggro. Mishra does not fit into that mold, I don't think. As a 3-drop, even with haste, 2/1 is just too small. By the time Mishra is going to be dropping, the opponent's going to have blockers, and the attack's not going to be meaningful. That said, the looting ability could be. Being able to rummage away 1 card and draw a card, that's big. Being able to sculpt your hand is very powerful, and being able to fill your graveyard with something that you have some control over could also be very good. Putting unearthed creatures in the yard, being able to put flashback spells in the yard, being able to put reanimation targets in the yard, it's pretty great, just saying. I don't know that Mishra Excavation Prodigy is going to beat out Fable of the Mirror Breaker anytime soon for the 3-drop slot in like red mid-range decks that want to take advantage of that effect. But all the same, the fact that it can also generate mana, like it's partially a looter and partially a mana dork, that's interesting actually. Because if you can't take advantage of that rebate and actually cast something on 2, like if your turn 3, now if your turn 4 is a Mishra Excavation Prodigy, discarding some artifact and then getting 2 mana that you then use to cast Lightning Strike, that's a very efficient turn where you got a lot done. And it puts a value engine on the field that your opponent likely wants to deal with in Excavation Prodigy. So it's a cool card. I like the idea. I wouldn't be surprised if there are like some artisan builds, like some artisan decks, like artisan mid-range decks, that could use this. And artisan is a format where you're only allowed to use commons and uncommons. That might make sense. Or Pauper Commander. This actually could probably be really fun in Pauper Commander. Pauper Commander is a format where you're only allowed to use commons in the 99 of a commander deck, and your commander has to be an uncommon. Because that is the lowest rarity at which legends have been printed, with the exception of the Prismatic Piper from Commander Legends. That one was printed at common, but it's real bad. And not exactly a satisfying build around. It's designed to be just color fixing and limited. But anyway, so yeah, interesting card, Mishra Excavation Prodigy. It does what it does fairly well, but it is a little expensive to fit into most decks. And in general, there are better options. Like I said, well, Fable. This is competing with Fable, the Mirror Breaker. So it's going to lose. That card wins. Anyway, Mishra's Command. This is a sorcery for X and a red. Choose 2. Choose target player. They may discard up to X cards. Then they draw a card for each card discarded this way. This spell deals X damage to target creature, spell deals X damage to target planeswalker, or target creature gets plus X plus 0 and gains haste until end of turn. The commands are all very bad. I'm just going to go on record as saying that. I do not like any of the commands in this set. This one I am the most intrigued by. I think the fail case on this being 2 blazes, one hitting a creature and one hitting a planeswalker, is actually pretty good. Now, Blaze is not a good card. If you're not familiar with Blaze, it is X and red Deal X damage to any target. That's all it is at sorcery speed. It is a bad fireball. But being able to get 2 of those effectively, if you need to be blasting creatures and planeswalkers with it, is nice. Also, because of that first mode, if you have even 1 card in your hand, you can get some value out of that. And if you have any creatures on board, the last mode effectively blasts your opponent's face, because it does grant haste and +X+0 to a creature. Interestingly enough, too, X can be 0. This has a mode on it that is just, for sorcery, pay 1, target creature gains haste until end of turn. That's not great, obviously, but if you just played a 4-drop flyer that doesn't have haste, but it has enough power to deliver a lethal shot, Mishra'S Command, if you have 1 red mana lying around, boop, that thing is now live. Swing for the win, call it good. So I think this card has this card has excellent flexibility. It can remove 2 permanents, it can massage your hand, or it can buff an attacker to a point that may present lethal in a situation where you wouldn't have it otherwise. So it's not, well, I was about to say it's not bad. I do still think this card is fairly bad. Let's be clear. The need to spend X mana at sorcery speed, like if this is gonna have a meaningful impact on the board, you have to have a lot of mana to dump into it. And even then, like certain situations kind of have to align in order for it to be really good value. There are going to be plenty of times where your opponent has like a Rafine and I don't know, Sorin down, and you're going to dump 4 or 5 mana, or you're going to dump 4 mana into X, assuming you can pay the ward cost on Rafine, and you're going to blow up a Planeswalker and one of the most devastating creatures in the game. It feels pretty good. That's going to be great. That's the other thing. This command can kill Sheoldred. Gotta have a lot of mana to do it. You gotta have 6 to bump into it. But if you have 6 mana lying around, this can ice Sheoldred while manipulating your hand. You know? That could be very good. There are a lot of games where you could be dead until you top deck this. So, it's removal. Sometimes you just need removal. Next up, Mishra'S Domination. This is an enchantment aura for 1 and a red enchant creature. As long as you control enchanted creature, it gets +2/+2. Otherwise, it can't block. I was complaining a lot about auras. I don't like auras. I think they present fragility in your permanents in a way that is really, really bad. Getting 2 for 1 because you played an aura feels awful. It is an experience we have all had, and it just sucks. There's nothing quite like it. However, in an aggressive situation, this one is a little bit different because it has 2 options. You can cast it on your own creature just to give it a +2/+2 buff. If you can swing for the win and they don't have any blockers down anyway, it gives you an additional 2 damage on one of your creatures. That's actually pretty good. Not amazing, but pretty good. If they do have a blocker, maybe a lifelinker or a flyer that is causing some problems, for 1 and a red, you can enchant that creature, and because you don't control it, it can't block. So all of a sudden, their one really good blocker that was going to be presenting a huge problem for you is off the table effectively, as far as combat is concerned, unless they can somehow remove Mishra'S Domination. So this is actually a piece of removal that I'm very interested in. Yeah, I think it's actually pretty strong. On top of that, okay, I might have to build a Temur Ivy deck now, come to think of it, because with Ivy, Gleeful Spell Thief, if you target Mishra'S Domination on one of your opponent's creatures, Ivy will trigger, and you have the opportunity to make a token copy of Domination and put it on Ivy. Well, because you control Ivy, and you don't control the other creature, the token, or both copies of Mishra'S Domination will have completely different effects. The creature on your opponent's board can no longer block, and now Ivy gets +2/+2. That's pretty neat. I like that a lot, actually. So I think this card's actually decent. Like, maybe not amazing, but if you can take advantage of some of those little modes, some of those details, this is pretty cool. Also, it's a permanent. It's a permanent for 2. So like I mentioned, Invoke Despair earlier. This is an enchantment you can sacrifice to Invoke Despair. You can recur it with cards like Luris or Sarah Paragon, cards that allow you to cast permanents out of your graveyard. You can effectively recur your removal with this. Now, it doesn't prevent the creature from activating any abilities or attacking you back, so be aware of that. But if you're in an aggressive strategy where blocking is like your worst enemy, this gets around that really nicely. Cool design. I like it. Next up, Mishra'S Onslaught. This is an instant for 3 and a red. Choose one. Create 2 1/1 colorless soldier artifact creature tokens. Or creatures you control go +2/+0 until end of turn. This is a red instant burn bright style overrun effect. I'm intrigued by it because you have flexibility. You can help establish a bigger board, or you have the opportunity to use the board you have to deliver a death blow to your opponent by screwing up all their combat math. You know, +2/+0 is a lot. That said, 4 mana is also a lot. You know, Burn Bright, which I, associate this with, I believe only costs 3, and you get a similar effect. Find a Pair of Goblins is another one. You get a similar effect, and it only costs 3. So, I don't love the fact that this costs 4. That's actually a huge knock against it. The ability to just pop out 2 tokens that happen to be soldiers and artifacts, which could have like crazy synergies there, is okay. But in the end, I'm not super enthused about this. I think it just costs a little bit too much for the effect you get. But these effects can be strong. If you, in go-wide situations, that style of effect can be very strong. So there might be like Brothers War constructed decks, like where you're only allowed to play with Brothers War decks, where this is really good. In draft, this could be incredibly strong. If you have an aggro deck in draft, this is a great finisher. So sweet, get after it there. But in constructed, I don't think this is going to be that great. Next up, we were talking about prowess earlier. We were talking about prowess payoffs, and I said I do believe the single best prowess payoff that has ever existed is printed in this set. Boom, there it is. Monastery Swiftspear. Human Monk, 1/2 haste, prowess for 1 red. If this card costs 2, it would actually be playable in standard, in my opinion. At 1, this card is cracked. And this is a reprint, by the way. This is actually a card that's been around for a while and sees a ton of play in eternal formats. Formats like Pioneer. Monastery Swiftspear is a staple in a lot of aggressive Spellslinger decks, and with really good reason. And right now in Standard, we have Haughty Djinn, we have Delver, we have Balmor, we have Electrostatic Infantry, we have a ton of spells matter hasty aggro things going on. We also, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Jaya, the Fiery Negotiator, who can create 1/1 prowess tokens. So we're in a situation where prowess matters. Prowess is a very big deal. On top of that, one of the core sets that actually happened like a year or two ago had a bunch of prowess cards in it too, like Stormwing Entity. Those cards are still legal in older formats as well. So if you want to rock some historic or explorer prowess, you now have Monastery Swiftspear in the mix too. Holy crap. This is going to be fantastic. And if you're wondering, okay, what's the big deal? Like, why is Monastery Swiftspear so good? All right. Turn 1, I'm on the play. I play Monastery Swiftspear, I attack you for 1. You go, you play a tap land. I go again. I play a Consider, followed by a Play with Fire. I've now drawn a card, I deal 2 damage to you. So you're now at 17. My Monastery Swiftspear is now a 3/4, and I'm attacking you with it. On turn 2, you haven't even effectively gotten to play the frickin' game yet, and you're already at 14 life. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. That's just the start. This card is incredibly strong, especially if it can get out early. And in decks that care about casting spells, this thing's gonna be great. It's just gonna be great. All right, next up, Obliterating Bolt. This is a sorcerer for 1 and a red. It deals 4 damage to target creature or planeswalker. If that creature or planeswalker would die this turn, exile it instead. This is very similar to cards like Scorching Dragonfire from Throne of Eldraine, where it was 3 damage, and if the creature died, it exiled for 2 at instant speed. The fact that Obliterating Bolt is 4 damage is a lot. That makes a big difference. I don't love the fact that it's sorcery speed. The one reason why, looking at this, I'm not sold on it, but I can see Grixis or Jund mid-range decks adopting this card because it's a really good answer to Raffine. Now, we already have Cut Down to deal with Raffine. However, Obliterating Bolt, well, yes, it is a decent answer to Raffine in that 4 damage is exactly, that's the magic number. This also takes out underdogs permanently by exiling them. So if your opponent has a tenacious underdog, just blast that and gets it gone. Pretty good. Because it's a sorcery, this isn't really a good answer to a Reckoner Bankbuster, unfortunately. If this was an instant, this card would be fantastic. Because then if your opponent crewed a Bankbuster trying to chip in for some damage, you can blast it. Unfortunately, the chances of you actually hitting a Bankbuster with this is very low because they have to crew it on their turn. And to be honest, we are in a format where Abrade is a thing. And I think Abrade's stock got significantly better with Brothers War, and yeah, I don't know that this is going to take that kind of position. 4 damage is a lot. I guess that's the question. That's what it comes down to. If there is a 4 toughness creature that becomes a staple in the format that you see everywhere, this card is actually going to become a good answer to that creature. Maybe as a sideboard card that you would like slot in if you're going up against that matchup. Who knows? Maybe Obstinate Baloth becomes the thing. I'm not holding my breath, but you never know. I think it's decent. If Sheldred was a 4/4, this card's amazing. Because she's not, this card is probably not going to see play. Which is unfortunate because, yeah, 4 damage and exile are both really good. And 2 mana is a reasonable price for that. Anyway, next up. We have Over the Top. This is a sorcery for 5 red. Each player reveals a number of cards from the top of their library equal to the number of non-land permanents they control. Put all permanent cards they revealed this way onto the battlefield and put the rest into your graveyard. I love this card. It's not good, but I love it. This is the kind of card that I want to put into a deck that has a ton of token generators. Like, I want this in a rabble-rousing deck. I want to be able to rip this and grab, like, 15 permanents off it. Like, that's what I want to do. I want to put it in a deck where, yeah. I want to put this in a deck literally where every single card is a permanent, and I have, like, things like Valderen Epicure, Fable the Mirror Breaker that are individual cards that pump out multiple permanents onto the board. I want to be able to rip this and, yeah, hit 5 or 6 off of it. And every single one of them goes onto the battlefield. My opponent will get some benefit, and it may be better than what I get. But you can stack the deck in your favor if you've built around this. At the end of the day, it's a 7-drop sorcery that does a universal effect. This is a commander card. Make no mistake, this is absolutely a commander card. If you're going stupid wide and you have a ton of tokens, and you hit this in a commander pod, everybody gets to spin and do fun, crazy things. Everybody gets to go, oh, sweet, you did the, whoa, you got the what? And that's fun. Those are the kind of moments that we enjoy in Commander. So as a result, this is a great Commander card. I'm going to try to build Standard around it. It's probably not going to work, but I'm going to try it. I think it's a neat idea. Actually, you know what? I think I know where I'm going to put this. I'm probably going to try this in a situation where I'm trying to reanimate one with the multiverse. If I can reanimate one with the multiverse and hit things like Herd Migration that is like pumping out a ton of tokens, being able to rip this potentially for free off one with the multiverse, that actually could be pretty good. So, I don't know. Things to think about. But, yeah, card's bad. But it's my kind of bad. All right, next up. Pendragon Strongbull. This is a 2/3 Minotaur for 2 and a red. Pay 1, sacrifice an artifact. Pendragon Strongbull gets +1/+1 until end of turn, and it deals 1 damage to each opponent. This is an interesting effect. This reads to me like a limited sack outlet. That is the goal here. If you're building like a Rakdos sacrifice deck in limited, this gives you something you can sack stuff to. Artifact sacrifice enablers are good because we have a situation where we're pumping out Power Stones and whatnot. The other thing I kind of like about this is if the Power Stones are untapped, you could tap the Power Stone and then use the mana they generated to activate this and sacrifice them, which is kind of fun. And this critter could end up getting pretty large. And not only, like if you attack with this and your opponent doesn't block it, you can then pump additional, pump this ability a couple of times, sacrifice a few permanents, artifacts rather, and you're getting the power buff that immediately is going to translate into damage. But on top of that, you're also just getting direct damage. So it's not bad. This actually becomes really good with cards like Mechanized Warfare, where you're multiplying individual, or where you're adding damage to each individual ping. That becomes pretty darn good. And in multiplayer pods, obviously you get more value because you have more opponents to be pinging. So I don't know. There's a place for this. This feels like a common though, because it costs 1 to activate. If it didn't cost 1 to activate, I'd say this card was actually very good, because an unlimited sack outlet is incredibly powerful, especially in older formats. But that's not what this is, unfortunately. But cool idea, cool card. As far as common sack outlets go, this seems pretty decent to me. Also, it's a Minotaur, which is a tribe that doesn't get a lot of love. So in Minotaur decks, that could be fun. But yeah, 2/3 for 3 with the potential upside of becoming like a 3/4 until end of turn that pings your opponent for 1. The payoff's not quite good enough. Next up, we have Pyrrhic Blast. This is an instant for 3 and a red. As an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a creature. Pyrrhic Blast deals damage equal to the sacrificed creature's power to any target. And draw a card. The 3 most beautiful words to ever grace a Magic card. Draw a card. As a direct result, this card is going into a lot of my EDH decks, and you best believe I'm going to be jank brewing around this. So being able to replace itself is a big deal. Additionally, this gives us an effect that we actually had been missing in Standard, with the exception of Zeotora. Zeotora's great. I love her. Don't get me wrong. But being able to cast this for 4 rather than force a 6-drop onto the battlefield and then wait until the end of turn, like flinging with Zeotora was a little tricky. Pyrrhic Blast is much easier. So if you have a situation where you have a large creature for whatever reason, maybe you're running like Unnatural Growth or something of that nature, and you just happen to have a really big thing until end of turn, Pyrrhic Blast can turn that into direct damage. And on top of that, well, a lot of times this is going to be lethal. But the fact that it also draws your card is really cool. I was a huge fan of Kazul's Fury before Zendikar rotated out of Standard. I used that in a lot of decks. It had the benefit of being an MDFC, but it was the fling effect for 3. It was 2 and a red, and you flung something where you sacrifice a creature and it deals damage equal to its power. This gives you that exact same effect at instant speed for 4, which is just good. Like, I like this effect. Fling is good. Fun fact, everybody, fling is good. And this is a fling variant that cantrips. And directly drawing cards in red is something you don't see every day. So I dig this. I dig this a lot, actually. Next up, Raise to the Ground. Sorcery, 2 and a red. This spell can't be countered. Those are words we like. Destroy target artifact. If its mana value is 1 or less, draw a card. I like this. Actually, you know where I see this? I see this in sideboards in Explorer. Because if your opponents are running sacrifice decks, Witch's Oven is public enemy number 1. And you want to just destroy it. That said, being able to, if your opponent has like a Portal to Phyrexia or one of those gigantic, prototype creatures on the field, being able to just pay 3 and blow it up is worth it. Like, 3 for a shatter effect is not great, even when they can't be countered. Like, that is upside to be sure. And let's be honest, actually in Standard, this would be hitting Bankbuster all day. And if my opponent plays like a Bankbuster on 2 and I play this on 3, blow up the Bankbuster, I don't feel great about that because I didn't draw the card off it, because it doesn't say mana value 2 or less. And I just took my turn off just to end their Bankbuster. Now, Bankbuster's going to draw them 3 cards and potentially end my life. So it's worth blowing up, but still, there are better options, better ways to do it than this, I think. But all the same, like in certain metas, if there are a lot of inexpensive creatures, okay, go with me here. Stonecoil Serpent, or Walking Ballista, or Hangerback Walker, for that matter. Those are 3 artifacts that are incredibly powerful in their various respective decks that all get +1/+1 counters loaded onto them, and their mana value is based off X. Raise to the Ground actually blows those up very easily, and they're huge threats that you need to answer. So this deals with those huge threats that you need to answer, and you draw a card off it. Also, actually, oddly enough, one format where this might work. Now, I said this at the top, and I stand by it. I do not know Modern and Legacy very well. I don't. I would like to, but I don't play them right now. Therefore, I'm not super familiar with them. However, I know in those formats, Chalice of the Void is very, very popular, and it is usually dropped on 1 or 2, shutting off all spells at the 1 or 2 mana spot. Because the way the Chalice works is if you cast a spell that is the same number of charge counters that are on Chalice of the Void, Chalice counters that spell. Well, Raise to the Ground, 1, its mana value is 3, so Chalice is probably not going to be on 3 to begin with. But even if it is, Raise to the Ground can't be countered. And then you destroy their Chalice of the Void and draw a card. That actually seems really good. Like, really good. So I can see this actually seeing some play. Well, let me phrase that. Again, I'm no expert. I wouldn't be surprised if this sees like 1 or 2 of sideboard play in like Modern and Legacy. I wouldn't be surprised, because this just dunks on Chalice really hard. That's cool. Yeah, all right. I'm intrigued. I'm intrigued by this. The upside is real. The sorcery speed's a bummer, but the upside is real. Anyway, next up, we have a Rock Hunter, and it's ROC. It's like the big bird hunter. They don't just like go into quarries like stalking literal rocks. That wouldn't make sense. It's a 3/1 for 1 and a red with Reach, Human Soldier at common. I like this card a lot, actually. It is interesting. Reach is a very defensive ability. However, this is obviously, but it's also a 3-power creature. Like 3/1, you usually think of as a pretty aggressive stat line, one you generally want to be attacking with. The fact that it has Reach gives you some flexibility, and that it can also just be a really good blocker. So I like this card. This is actually pretty strong. I mean, if your opponent even has something like an Owl, and you have a Rock Hunter and any like piece of equipment or aura or a +1/+1 counter that can buff this thing up, all of a sudden you have a little 2-drop that can trade with a 5-drop dragon. Like, that's pretty rad. I like that. Now, it will trade. It only has 1 toughness, so this thing is going to trade with whatever it blocks in most situations. That's still pretty cool. If you have any way to give this thing first strike, that actually becomes really good. And in general, I think 3/1s for 2 are generally pretty good. Like 3/2 for 2 obviously is better, but there are only a handful of those and they're all great. But yeah, 3/1 for 2 is a pretty good stat line, and Reach is very valuable. So I think in limited, this is going to be awesome, like in any kind of like red aggressive or mid-range deck, because it still is a 3/1 for 2. You can still attack for 3 damage. Even like Reach isn't going to help you there, but you can still do it. And the fact that it can pick off flyers much more expensive than it is pretty great. 3-power Reach is no joke. If your opponent has flyers, they're going to need to deal with this. I like that. Next up, Sardian Cliff Stomper. This is a 0/4 for 1 and a red. As long as it's your turn and you control 4 or more mountains, Sardian Cliff Stomper gets +X/+0, where X is the number of mountains you control. It's a Minotaur, so again, Minotaur Tribal, if anybody's out there playing that. Anybody out there with Sethron Commander decks, here you go, you got a new toy. And a 0/4 for 2, this is going to be a very defensive creature at first. And the vibe, the flavor that I get off this is it like protects its home until they are well established and secure enough for it to venture out and deal with the threats in a more assertive fashion. That's the vibe I get, because it's going to be blocking for you until you have at least 4 mountains down, and then all of a sudden, like once you have 4 mountains, you have a 4/4 that you only paid 2 for. So if you're in a mono red deck, I mean, you can do a lot worse than this actually. I mean, because a 4/4 for 2, even with one with a little bit of delayed gratification there, is still worth it. And if it's really late in the game, if you top deck this and you have like 6 or 7 mountains down, it's going to be a 6 or 7 4 for 2. Like, that's pretty decent. Yeah, so if you're in a mono red deck and you don't have many utility lands or any utility lands, this actually could be pretty good. And on top of that, this is a great fling target. So if this thing comes down as like a 9/4, even if you can't reasonably attack with it because your opponent has good blocks, you could also just fling it at your opponent. Like, I like that a lot. Using either Ziatoro or that spell we were looking at earlier. Like, yeah, you know, not bad. Each in this set, each color gets, and we've talked about this, you know, we've talked about a number of them already. Each color is getting something that benefits you for having a certain number of its basic land type. This is really a good one. I think this is very strong. I think the green one might be the best one, but that may be the nostalgia talking. The green one's actually a reprint. But I gotta say, Sardian Cliffstomper, rock solid. It's also Barbarian. If you care about Barbarians, that's another one of those. Like this card has 2 underserved tribes smashed onto 1 card. I kind of like that. I have a soft spot for that. Anyway, next up, Sibling Rivalry, which is actually the grossest way to like understate the entire story of this set. In an event, sorcery, 3 in a red, gain control of target artifact or creature until end of turn. Untap it, gains haste until end of turn. Create a tapped Power Stone token. And we see this effect every set. Yeah, we see this effect every set. It is Threaten. This is an ability to take a thing until end of turn, and in this case, you also just whip out a Power Stone token. In decks that can sacrifice, this is great. In decks that cannot sacrifice, this effect is lackluster at best. So if you have the ability to sacrifice it to something else, any sack outlet will do, then all of a sudden this is very good. This also has one other thing going for it that most other threaten effects do not, and that is that you can target an artifact with it. So this can target a creature or an artifact. If there's just a generically good artifact, be that a vehicle or be that just a non-creature artifact like a Portal to Phyrexia or something of that nature, you can steal it. That's nice. There's usually, you know, good things you can do with that. But if you can't sacrifice the stolen creature before the end of the turn and you have to give it back, it's probably not worth it. Yeah, this is fine. We see this all the time. Yeah. I think, to be honest, actually, I think there are just better ones that are even available in Standard right now over this. But anyway. Next up, Tamakul Scrapsmith. This is a 2/1 for 2 in a red, a common human artificer. When it enters the battlefield, mill 3 cards. You may put an artifact card from among the cards milled this way into your hand. If you don't, put a +1/+1 counter on Tamakul Scrapsmith. I really wish this was a 2-drop. I really wish this was a 2-drop. The fact that it's a 3-drop makes it so that, like, the fail case, if you don't get an artifact into your graveyard, you get a 3/2, which is fine, but a 3/2, but a vanilla 3/2 for 3 isn't playable. Like, that's just not good enough. Even one that puts 3 cards in your graveyard upon entering, and don't get me wrong, I love putting cards in my graveyard. I'm a big sucker for that. Milling 3 cards upon ETV is useful, but your deck needs to have a critical mass of artifacts, because if you play this out and you get a 2/1 for 3 that draws you an artifact, that's actually not bad. It replaces itself in hand. You get a body that you can actually work with. 2 powers, no joke. Your opponent may have to think twice about attacking into it, and that's nice. You know, actually, like, it's not a bad card if you're leveraging your graveyard and you have a boatload of artifacts, so you're likely to actually pull something off the mill. It's okay. But if you're not doing a dedicated graveyard artifact theme, this card doesn't work. All right, next up. Tyrant of Kher Ridges. This is a 4/5 flying dragon for 4 red. When it enters the battlefield, it deals 4 damage to any target, and you can pay 1 red. Tyrant of Kher Ridges gets +1/+0 until end of turn. So classic fire breathing, not the new like Power Stone fire breathing. And it ETBs and does 4 damage to any target. That is good removal. It also could be player removal in certain situations. This is also a very blinkable target. And its power being 4 means that it's kind of its own little mini Terror of the Peaks when it enters, which is kind of fun. Well, actually, the comparison is actually more apt to Red Dragon from Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, which was a 4/4 for 6 when it ETB'd, dealt 4 damage to your opponent. This kind of gives me those vibes. It's fine. The fact that it can operate as removal makes it actually significantly better than, well, Red Dragon, if I'm honest. And the fire breathing's no joke too. So 6 mana for a 4/5 feels pretty bad most of the time. It's just an awful lot to spend for a body that is not as big as you want it to be. But when it enters, it can blow up a very real target on the opposite side. Again, unfortunately, it can't kill Sheoldred on its own, which is a real bummer. That is like the biggest downside. But it's 4 damage, locked and loaded. 6 mana is reasonable these days. Like, I can see in like Jund mid-range or Grixis mid-range decks that are leveraging like cards like Fable, the Mirror Breaker, that can generate treasure tokens and help you ramp a little bit. Getting to 6 mana is not going to be that tricky in the current meta. So this is like maybe a 2 of in that kind of deck where you can just jam it late and you're just... I'm going to blow up, you know, like I'm going to kill your Fable or, you know, your Reflection of Kiki Jiki, or maybe your Rafine that you like just top decked. And on top of that, I now have a 4/5 fire breathing body that you need to deal with. You know, you could do worse than that. In general, I think this card is just solid. The other situation where I'd like to see it is in a blink kind of shell. If you can flicker this. So if you're already doing flicker shenanigans, possibly with the prototype creatures, this is like a 1, maybe a 2 of in that style of deck. If you happen to have red mana, could actually be quite strong. Because being able to flicker it and just deal 4 damage, like, that's pretty great. So if you're building the kind of, if you're like me and you enjoy the idea of like Golden Argosy style jank, Tyrant of Courage is my fit in that deck. Next up, Unleash Shell. I see what they did there. On my signal, Unleash Shell. All right. Anybody who remembers the intro to Gladiator, let's be friends. This is an instant for 3 red. Unleash Shell deals 5 damage to target creature or planeswalker and 2 damage to that permanent's controller. This is limited removal at its finest. That said, it can kill Sheoldred, just saying. But it's an instant for 5. It costs 5. Destroy Evil costs 2. Anyway, there are much better ways to deal 5 damage. Unleash Shell is very expensive for what you get. 5 damage at instant speed plus 2 damage to your opponent's face. Total of 7 damage at instant speed is a lot. You know, it's really great removal. It picks off just about every planeswalker in the game right now. Or a lot of big threats. Like, it can even hit Rafine after she's connived once. Like, that's pretty great. It's just 5 mana is just so much. Like, 5 mana removal is not where I want to be. It's very expensive. And yeah, it's just not quite worth it. In limited, I'm going to take this all day because you need removal. Like, you just need removal. And if you're in red, this does the job. You know, but yeah, in constructed, I don't see a single... I cannot imagine a single situation. Even in like goofy bombardment decks, I probably don't want this. Like, there are just better ways to spend 5 mana. Next up, Visions of Phyrexia. This is an enchantment for 2 red. At the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of your library. You might play that card this turn. At the beginning of your end step, if you didn't play a card from exile this turn, create a tapped Power Stone token. Power Stone tokens, again, I will sustain this. Power Stone tokens, I think, are better than they first read. I do think they are decent. They are a real permanent. That is a very real asset that you can leverage. That said, this card wants you to take turn 4 off in order to effectively draw another card at the beginning of each turn, which is good. And you have the upside, if you don't like the card that you drew, you can instead trade it in for a Power Stone token at the end of the turn. So it's not bad. This reads to me like a really good commander card, or in a format that is fairly slow. Like, I need to be running a lot of like board wipes and counter spells to be comfortable playing this. Because if your opponent has any meaningful board presence, this is a liability. It's just, it costs too much and you do not get enough benefit on board to justify its inclusion in your deck. So I don't think in standard or any 60 card format, this is really going to hold up. Even in like super controlling decks, there are better, more efficient ways to draw cards than this. And frankly, there are better, more efficient ways to create Power Stones than this. Like, if I'm going to use this for the Power Stones, like if I really want Power Stones, I'm playing Karn Living Legacy. He has a +1 that poops out a Power Stone. And it's a 4-drop generic that also has the upside of pulling removal or damage that would otherwise go towards my life total by virtue of being a Planeswalker. I don't think, and that's Karn Living Legacy, a card that most people think is terrible, is like strictly better than this. Yeah, I don't like Visions of Phyrexia. I really don't. I think this card is a trap, and I think it is a waste of a good rare slot. Like, if I'm opening a Brothers War pack and this is my rare, I'm sad. Like, genuinely sad. Great art, though. Like, that's actually one of the things I really like. Mad props to the art directors and everybody at Wizards. Like, they gave some of the worst cards some of the dopest art. So it's not a total loss. There's a beautiful picture, so that's something. Anyway, next up, Whirling Strike. This is an instant for 1 and a red. Target creature gets +2/+0 and gains First Strike and Trample until end of turn. This is combat chicanery at its finest. In most sets, I would say this probably isn't quite good enough. +2/+0 and first strike and trample, that's a lot of value that you're getting, and only for 2. Like, First Strike's a big deal. You have the opportunity to blow your opponent out in combat. Trample's a big deal because then all of a sudden your opponent's taking additional damage they had not accounted for. And well, I mean, yeah, that's about the end of that statement, I suppose. Like, your creature is likely going to survive, and you're going to win combat if you cast this. This is especially good, however, in this set and in this standard environment because we have prowess. If you're targeting a Monastery Swiftspear with this, not only do you get this benefit, it also gives it the +1/+1 until end of turn. That's pretty great. It's pretty great. So I like it. In Spells Matter, like, aggressive decks, this actually could be a really good trick that could really mess some people up. And if you're also combining this with, like, Balmor and, you know, and maybe targeting a Haughty Djinn with this, could you imagine, like, a 7/8 power Haughty Djinn swinging in, you cast this, it gives the +2/+0, and it puts another instant in your graveyard to buff the Djinn even more. Like, and if Balmor's out, you get an additional +1/+0 for casting spells. You get the idea. Like, in this particular set, in a situation where you want to be casting spells while having a good board state, this card is excellent. Like, I think it's actually quite strong. Next up, Blitz Automaton. All right, we're getting into the colorless with a strong red identity cards. This is a 6/4 haster for 7, and you can prototype it as a 3/2 for 3 with haste. This is a common Blitz creature and actually, in short, I like it. 3/2 with haste for 3 is reasonable. You know, being able to attack for 3 damage out of nowhere is worth 3. And one of the cool things about hasty creatures like this is in going up against mid-range decks, which we're seeing a lot right now, aggressive decks oftentimes just need to get a little bit more damage at the end of the game. The attrition has gone back and forth. Both players are low on resources. The aggro player is top decking and just trying to swing in. The more controlling mid-range player has low life, and they just need to get another 4 or 5 mana, or damage rather. Like, they just need to chip in for the last little bit of damage. You top deck a 3/2 for 3 with haste, all of a sudden, okay, great. I can just jam that, swing in, smack them for 3, and if I survive for another turn, if they do not draw the removal, I win the game. Dope. Feels great. Blitz Automaton is especially well equipped for those situations, however, because if you top deck it late enough in the game and you happen to have 7 mana lying around, you didn't top deck a 3/2, you top decked a 6/4. And being able to attack for 6 damage out of nowhere is so much better than 3, it's not even funny. Like, a 6/4 for 7 is not a good stat line, but in a super aggressive deck, having that extra mode of being able to get a gigantic creature in the late game swinging out of nowhere can win you a lot of games. So I can see red decks adopting this as, like, a decent 3-drop that they're not mad to play, or just a crushing finisher. So, like, as far as a common, like, prototype creature goes, I really like this one. Like, it actually seems pretty strong. All right, next up, Falagi Dragon Engine. This is an uncommon prototype creature. This is a 5/5 flying, pay 2. It gets +1/+0 till end of turn for 8. Or you get a 1/3 for 2 and a red. 5/5 flyers are a big deal. That is really powerful. And the fact that you can pump mana into this to just buff its power, it has quasi fire breathing. Unfortunately, it's 2 generic instead of just 1 for the fire breathing effect on this thing, which is really unfortunate. However, if you're casting it for prototype cost, you get a 1/3 flyer for 3 with a variable power. Like, threat of activation is real. If you have 4 mana up, you effectively have a 3/3 flyer. Like, that's not bad. Having to invest a ton of mana into it to get those power buffs consistently is a huge drawback, though. I really don't like that. So, in short, this is not good. I don't think this card's particularly great. Neither mode on it feels strong enough to me. A 1/3 for 3 flyer is just meh. Now, red doesn't always have the best flyers, with the exception of dragons, of course. Although this is, in fact, a dragon, and it's kind of weak. Yeah, no, I'm not liking this. I'm really not liking this. If you're in a situation where you have a ton of power stones, and you have 8 mana lying around, you can do better. Like, yeah. If you're in a situation where you have, like, flickery shenanigans, if you can play it for 3, have it crew your Golden Argosy, and attack, and then all of a sudden it becomes a 5/5, like, it's not bad. But to be honest, I think there are probably better prototype creatures you can be using, you can be doing those tricks with. So, yeah, I'm not sold on this one. Next up, Heavyweight Demolisher. This is an 8/6 Menace for 7. At the beginning of your upkeep, tap Heavyweight Demolisher unless you pay 3. And it has Unearth, 6, red. This is big. That's the name of the game. This thing is just big. And looking at the artwork, it looks freaking big. This is clearly a creation that Mishra slapped together, and it's just massive. 8/6 Menace is no joke. Your opponent either has to take 8 in the face or put 2 creatures in front of this that they are likely going to say goodbye to. The upkeep cost of 3 is a little bit of a bummer, but it only taps. If you don't pay the upkeep cost, it just taps. You don't lose it, which is good. Which is why it isn't a true upkeep cost. Like classic upkeep, if you didn't pay it, it died. In this case, it just taps. So, it's not the end of the world. If you have other things you want to use your mana on in a given turn, you can do that. And that little upkeep cost also makes this not a particularly good reanimation target, which is kind of a bummer, because that's the kind of thing I want to be doing with it. Pulling an 8/6 Menace out of the graveyard, like on turn 5, would be really nice. But that 8/6 Menace coming out of your graveyard, then restricting you on 3 mana for the rest of the game for as long as it's around, that sucks. Like, I don't like that. That kind of defeats the whole purpose of reanimating it. Yeah, the other thing you can do is with that sneak attack that we were looking at earlier, this is actually a really good target for that. Being able to pay 4 and just dump this into play and swing with it immediately. And then it dies at the end of the turn, and then you can unearth it next turn and just get swing again. Like, that's pretty cool. I mean, it's just big and dumb. If you need big and dumb, this does it very well. Menace fits on big creatures like a freaking glove. It works really nicely. So, I don't know. I'm intrigued, but it's pretty straightforward. I love big dumb stuff. This is just the big dumb uncommon thing. Next up, Mishra'S Juggernaut. This is a 5/3 for 5 Juggernaut with trample. Mishra'S Juggernaut attacks each combat if able, and it unearths for 5 and a red. 5/3 trample's good. 5/3 trample is not a bad stat line. The fact that it costs 5 really bites. Like, I want this to cost 4 at most, to be honest, because attacking each combat if able is a very real downside. The fact that I've got a 5-power creature and I do not have the choice to block with it, and with 3 toughness, this thing is going to die in combat a lot. Like, a lot. Being able to unearth it for 6 is nice, but I think this is just too expensive. If this costs 4, if this was like a 5/4 for 4 with trample, and they must attack each combat if able, then I'm on board. But 5/3 for 5, it dies to Lightning Strike. Like, no, I don't think this is particularly good. It does give you the opportunity to say, I'm the Juggernaut bitch, though, and that's kind of fun if you're into those old school YouTube series. Anyway, next up, Mishra'S Research Desk. This is an artifact for 1. Pay 1, tap, sack it, exile the top 2 cards of your library, choose one of them until the end of your next turn, you may play that card, and then it unearths for 1 and a red. In sacrifice decks, this is actually very nice because it can sacrifice itself, and it's just a 1-drop artifact you can sacrifice to things like Oni Called Anvil for value. And then it also unearths itself, so if you have the ability to sacrifice it to other value, or you need it to trigger sacrifice effects, it can do it again. You can unearth it for 2, then pay the 1, tap it, sack it, goes into exile, and you trigger any sacrifice triggers that you have go off with that. And then you also get a card. So, like, it's not bad. If you're getting synergies from sacrificing small artifacts, this is actually a pretty good little utility piece. It does a lot of things you like. It replaces itself, it triggers sac effects, and it can unearth. You can even double dip on it. Like, it's actually not a bad little utility card. I like it. Next up, Phyrexian Dragon Engine. Now, this is a unique case. When I was determining what cards to look at, I almost didn't put this on the list for today, because it is part of a meld creature. And because we are doing the mono red set review, I will not be doing the full meld review yet. I do plan on looking at the meld creatures, possibly as their own separate episode, to be honest, because they're all very unique in how they function. And so today, for this purpose, for this set review, I'm going to look at Phyrexian Dragon Engine as a standalone card. It does meld with Mishra to create a really cool card, if I'm honest. Spoiler warning, I like it. But let's just take a look at Phyrexian Dragon Engine, because to be honest face, this card's already worth it. It's a 2/2 double striking Phyrexian Dragon for 3 generic. When Phyrexian Dragon enters the battlefield from your graveyard, you may discard your hand. If you do, draw 3 cards, and it unearths for 3 red. So 2/2 double strike for 3 in any color is fantastic. Because the unearth has red in the cost, if you're playing Commander, you are limited to being in a deck that has red as part of the Commander color identity. That's a thing, be aware of that. But in Standard, this is just a good card. It's right down the middle. It fits the modes that you're looking for. It's just a good body for 3. 2/2 double striker for 3 is awesome. If you're in a situation where you have like Rafine and you can connive it multiple times, that gets out of hand because double strike is great. If you're in red and you have combat tricks that give it, +2/+0 or +1/+1 counters, or any of those situations, anything you can do to buff this creature is going to pay dividends. And then on top of that, if your opponent destroys it, you're going to unearth it later, get an additional attack off of it, and recharge your hand if you've emptied it. So I think this card is just great. Like, nothing short of great. And on top of that, its creature types are Phyrexian and Dragon. If you're rocking Dragon Tribal or Dragon synergies of any kind, this fits into the mix perfectly. We also don't currently have very many Phyrexian Tribal synergies. None in Standard that I'm aware of. That might change. We're going to Phyrexia in the next set. Phyrexia all will be one. That might change. We might have legit Phyrexian Tribal be a deck. And I think the Dragon Engine could easily be a part of it. Yeah. And if you're in Rakdos, you could also put the Mythic Mishra in there and potentially meld it. Even though one of the things that's really cool about the Mishra meld, I'm going to get a little ahead of myself here. One of the cool things about the Mishra meld is that both cards are just good aggressive cards. And you can just beat your opponent down with either of them independently. But if they meld, you get a monster that is so difficult to deal with. It's not even funny. So it's one of those where I think of all the melds, Mishras are possibly the most generically good as independent cards. Yeah, very good. Next up, we have Scrapwork Mutt. This is an artifact creature dog, 2/1 for 2. When it enters the battlefield, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card, and it unearths for 1 red. This is just down the middle good. It's also a dog. If you are running like M21, Rin in Siri, like Historic Brawl, it's a dog. It counts. Go for it. But additionally, the ETB discard a card, draw a card is actually a really good effect. I mean, we see Rafine's Informant get play all the way back into Explorer, and I think even Pioneer, just because it has ETB Connive, which is draw a card, discard a card. Granted, a little bit better, because you also get the counter if you discard a non-land, but all the same, a 2-drop that can put a card in your graveyard is powerful. Like, that is a very meaningful effect. In this case, you have to discard it before you draw. Unlike Rafine's Informant is better. It just is. But Scrapwork Mutt has some benefits. It has some upsides. And it does, at the end of the day, do the thing. If you're looking, if you're in a Reanimator kind of situation and you just need to put stuff in your graveyard, this isn't a bad way to do it. Like, you can do a lot worse. And on top of that, if it finds its way into your graveyard through like a mill or maybe another discard, you can unearth it. You can just bring it back. So, yeah, it's just a nice little utility piece. And it fits any color combination with the, you know, it benefits you from to have red so you can unearth it, but just too generic. Pretty good. I like it. All right, and the last one that we have to talk about today is actually a mythic prototype creature. It is Skitterbeam Battalion. This is a 4/4 for 9 with trample and haste. When Skitterbeam Battalion enters the battlefield, if you cast it, create 2 tokens that are copies of it. So a 4/4 for 9 is not really great, but 3 4/4s for 9, that ain't bad. And they all have trample and haste. So you have 12 trampling damage across 3 bodies crashing in on your opponent the turn this comes into play if you cast it for 9. That's pretty great. And 9 mana with Power Stones and various ramp things going on right now between the treasure tokens of Streets of New Capenna and the Power Stone tokens of Brothers War. I have a feeling getting to 9 mana is not going to be that hard nowadays. Yeah. And additionally, if you can't spend 9 on it, you can pay 3 red, and you get that exact same effect, but with 2/2 bodies instead of 4/4 bodies. And that's still pretty decent because you get, you know, what you get there are 3 2/2 haste tramplers. So you're still putting 6 trampling power on the board for 5. If you're in a situation where you have where you have buff style effects, if you have anthem effects where your creatures get larger, this is great. If you have Mechanized Warfare, was a card that we talked about earlier, that it's that enchantment for 3 that buffs your whole team in such a way that, but the way it says, if a red permanent or artifact permanent you control would deal damage, it deals 1 additional damage. And so Skitterbeam Battalion can, you know, you get 3 targets crashing in if you have Mechanized Warfare down, which also, by the way, is not legendary. You can have multiples of those. But assuming you have 1, when you cast Skitterbeam Battalion for 5, you're crashing in with 3 2/2s with trample. So I believe the way that works is if your opponent puts like a 2/2 in front of it, it assigns 2 damage, it actually deals 3, and then it assigns an additional damage, which it actually deals 2 to you, because you're hitting 2 different permanents, and you're splitting those damage, the damage in different ways. So Mechanized Warfare buffs on both, I believe is how that works. So this could run roughshod on your opponents if you're benefiting from going wide. Like, it doesn't look like, when I first read this, I was like, it's fine, I guess. And then I was thinking more of the synergies, and like, you're almost never going to pay 9 for it, to be honest. I think this is really at home in go wide mono red aggro, where it's your finisher at 5. You know, I think that's really where this belongs, and it's gonna finish games at 5. So I'm thinking 1, maybe 2 of in that deck. Like, I don't think you really want a lot, because a 5-drop, like the smallest version of this card is a 5-drop. That is asking a lot. That said, if you're doing anything with Hideaway where you could potentially free cast it, anything where you can free cast this card, it becomes amazing, because then you get the 4/4. Like, that's pretty sweet. I don't know. I like the idea. I like the idea of this card a lot. I also am really disappointed in the prototype creatures all having, or many of them anyway, having the if you cast it clause on their ETB triggers. That's really a bummer, because, I mean, we all want to blink these. Like, we just do. I want to spend 5 mana on this, then I want to blink it for 2 and get, like, just a massive squad. Like, that's of course what I want, but of course they're not gonna let me have that, because that's like stupid good, which is fair. Like, it needs to be balanced to some degree, so I get it. But yeah, all in all, I think Skitterbeam Battalion is actually pretty good. In aggressive decks, I think it can be very strong. 6 power for 5 across 3 bodies is exactly where you want to be. Anything that buffs your squad makes all those things better. Great. Love to see it. It's also a construct. If you care about construct tribal, it also puts 3 artifacts on the battlefield. If you care about artifacts entering the battlefield or sacrificing or whatever, it gives you 3 bodies for the 1 card. That's good. That's just good. I don't know what else to say. So, thank you so much for checking out the video. I really appreciate it. It means the world. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe. It makes a huge difference. Also, candidly, if you like these set reviews and you want to see me do more of them, please leave a comment down below letting me know. The last couple of episodes, if I'm honest, as of this recording, have not had the kind of view traction that I was hoping for. They're very long. I understand that is asking a lot of your typical YouTube viewer. So thank you so much for making it to the end. It means the world. I really appreciate it. But as a result, I'm probably not going to continue making these beyond this set unless there is outcry otherwise. Just because these take a lot of work. It's a long time. It's a big commitment for me to actually do this. And then on top of that, if they aren't getting the kind of traction that I need for it to be kind of worth it, then I might shift and go into other formats for future like set impressions and set reviews. We might be looking at top 5s, top 10s, that kind of thing. We'll see. In any event, thank you so much for bearing with me here as I experiment with this format. It's fun. I enjoy talking about Magic cards. I do. I love this. Believe it or not, I enjoy doing this. So thank you for sticking with me. I appreciate it very, very much. We still have the green cards to go as well as the multicolor and the colorless, so stay tuned for those. In the meantime, stay good to each other, and I'll catch you on the next one.